Good morning. It is Sunday I just forgot the date, Sunday the 17th of January, and I welcome you to our message for today. I'm Captain Fiona and I'm from the Salvation Army in Chilliwack. And at the moment in BC, we're not able to have in-person services, so we're presenting the word like this. This is the best format we've decided for our core to share the word. And it's my privilege today to be continuing a series that Matt started last week. And that series is called A Different Kind of Faith. And today's theme is a faith that runs deep. Now, I am somebody who loves the water. I'm a water girl. And by water, I preferably mean beach, but pool, lake, river, they're all great. I love the warm weather. I love to be out. I love to be swimming and playing in the waves. I got a paddleboard for my birthday last year, which I guess is probably better to be on a lake than the ocean. Well, I haven't tried it. I know you can do it in the ocean, but anyway. I love being out there, and I have done some surfing. I wouldn't call myself a surfer, but I do love it, and I have tried my best. But I love being around the water. I love swimming. I love being at the water. But really, I guess you could say I mostly just have fun kind of on the surface of the water. I don't really go down deep. There are a lot of fun things to do on the surface, and I guess it's maybe more about me than it is about the ocean itself, because the ocean is so much more than the beach. The ocean is so much more than what you can see just being kind of on top or near the surface. You know, when my kids were smaller, they watched this show called Octonauts. If you have not seen it, even if you're an adult, you don't have any kids around, just watch an episode of Octonauts. I absolutely love it. The Octonauts are a team of undersea explorers, and they're always ready to get into whatever action is needed. They rescue animals, they investigate problems, they're like a great team. And apart from the fact that this team is led by a bear and a kitten and a penguin, all the events that they get themselves into, all the rescues that they do, all the animals and the things that happen in the show are actually based on real life events. So for example, you know, I never knew much about the midnight zone or the snot sea cucumbers I've learnt about in this show as well, or the cookie cutter sharks or the kelp forest. They're things that I'd never really knew about until I watched this show, Octonauts. There's so much more to the ocean when you go down deep. But you know, going down deep takes a bit more effort, doesn't it, for a regular old human like myself? You know, you need the gear, and you need boats, and you need training. You know, like I'm thinking of scuba divers or submarine adventures and things like that. It takes a lot more effort than just playing on the surface. But there is so much more to see when it actually comes to the ocean. If I want to learn about the ocean and immerse myself in it, playing on the surface is not going to do it. Playing like I do on the surface it can be a little bit risky, but not nearly as risky as going down to the deep. Playing on the surface is about me, but going down deep and looking at the fish and the seabeds and the sea plants and the coral reefs and everything else that is down there, there's a lot more risk involved. On the surface, it's about me, but on the deep, it's about the ocean. You know, I want to look at Peter today, and I'm not talking about the book of Peter in the Bible. I'm talking about Peter, the man, the disciple. And there are two parts of his life that we can read about that I want to concentrate on. And essentially the same thing happened in each of these events, but the outcomes were very different. You see, Peter was called twice by Jesus. You know, I'm not sure any of us would ever be in that same circumstance where we need to be called twice by Jesus, but Peter was called twice by Jesus. And that call was one that Jesus calls to many people back then, and he calls to us today. And the call of Jesus to Peter was, he said, "Follow me." Jesus, we read in Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 to 22, Jesus calls Peter and his brother Andrew to follow him. And this happened right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And Peter responds by following Jesus. And he spends the next 3 years with him. following him around, listening to him, listen to his teaching, seeing him perform miracles, spending day in and day out, doing ordinary things, eating, sleeping, and traveling with this man, Jesus. Peter follows him around. And if we look at these 3 years that Jesus performed his public ministry on earth that we read about in the scriptures, we fast forward these 3 years after the initial call from Jesus to Peter to follow him. And we get to the Passover just a few days before Jesus' death. And Peter tells Jesus that he would rather die than disown Jesus. And then Peter even stands up for Jesus. He thinks he's standing up for Jesus by cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant, which Jesus had to correct Peter's mistake there. And yet just hours later, when Jesus had been arrested and had been before the Sanhedrin, Peter denies Jesus. He denies knowing him, he denies being his disciple, he denies having ever had anything to do with him. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. You know, it seems like a little bit in those first 3 years, while it was a little risky, perhaps Peter following Jesus was almost more about Peter than it was about Jesus. You know, on the surface, Peter was willing to follow Jesus anywhere. He was willing to die for him and willing to stand up for him no matter the cost. But when it actually came to the crunch, when it actually got hard, Peter takes a step back. He's not really willing to go there. And then when that rooster crows, Peter realizes what he's done, and it breaks his heart. You know, I wonder how many of us have walked with Jesus for a little while, or even a couple of years, or maybe a long while, because it was good or comfortable, or maybe it was more about us. And how many of us, when things got really hard, when it came to that moment, when things came to the crunch, how many of us have denied him? The surface is more about us. The deep is about Jesus. And we're looking at this idea of having a different kind of faith. And a different kind of faith is one that requires us to go to the deep. So after this moment of denial from Peter, Jesus goes on to die on the cross, and then he rises from the grave. And Jesus sees the disciples on multiple occasions. And here Peter is again. He sees it all. He sees it all with different eyes though, as you do if you've ever experienced heartbreak, or that moment when you just sink in yourself because you know you've done something that you didn't ever want to do. And Peter sees it with different eyes. And he looks at Jesus, he talks to him, he spends time with him again. And the time comes for Peter to make a decision. If you turn to John chapter 21, there's a story where Jesus is again talking to Peter, asking him that same question he'd asked him 3 years earlier on that beach. Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Follow me. But this time, for real. This time, it's going to be harder. It's going to cost more, but it's about me, says Jesus. And you know, Jesus kind of lays it out in Matthew chapter 16. And funnily enough, it's actually in another conversation that Jesus and Peter are having. Jesus said to him, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." Deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Jesus wants us to go deep. He wants us to follow him. He doesn't want us to follow him when it's easy for us. He doesn't want us to follow him our own way. He wants us to follow him his way. Don't ever let anyone tell you that Jesus isn't an all or nothing guy. He wants us to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. He doesn't want us to play on the surface of being a disciple or drop it like a hot potato when it's no longer easy, or we find it doesn't suit us, or we get ourselves into a tricky situation. To have a different kind of faith, to have a deep faith, we need to rid ourselves of us and take on him. All of our insecurities, all of our pride, all of our wrongdoings, all of our desires, he wants us to turn them over to him and have a different kind of faith. He wants us to be filled by him, by his Holy Spirit, to subscribe to his teachings, his ways, his life, to devote ourselves to him each and every day. You know, Jesus was happy for his disciples to walk with him, and his disciples didn't get it right. Sometimes not the first time, not the second time, and not the third time. But he wants us to follow him. What he longed for was a deep connection. He knew that if they truly followed him, that they would experience life and experience life to the full. That they would know more freedom, more joy, more peace than ever before, because they were with him. Being a follower of Jesus isn't about our ideas or how comfortable we are. Being an actual follower of Jesus requires us to give up what we think and to take on his ways. You know, I wonder, when was the last time we found ourselves following Jesus that kind of really put us at odds with where we'd rather be? Are we playing on the surface, or are we diving in the deep? The beauty of diving in the deep is that it is a richer, fuller life than we ever could have imagined, than if we're just playing in the shallows. Peter first followed Jesus on his own strength, but then he followed Jesus in the Spirit's strength. His life and his faith were completely changed. There is so much more than dipping our toes in the shallows. We need to fully submerge ourselves to experience it all. To have a different kind of faith, it is one that must go deep. Amen.